20 plus years, I ran a motion design firm in Santa Monica, California, where we make commercials and music videos for some of the biggest brands and bands in the world. In the last 6 or 7 years, I started a second company called The Futur. We tried to educate people through open platforms like YouTube and social media to teach them how to make money doing what it is that they love.
The idea of AI is to be enhancing or perfecting the human experience when it comes to radiology. Sitting back and reading screening mammograms, it's important work and absolutely is the backbone of what I do as a breast imaging radiologist. But I need to make sure women are getting in the door for those. I need to make sure they understand why they're coming for those so that they're able to be more compliant with these recommendations.
Welcome to your favorite podcast, 1000 African Voices, broadcasting from an African perspective. 1000 African Voices is a program aimed at breaking down the boundaries that divide us as a continent, the boundaries that divide our beautiful people. You can also find the show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast by searching for 1000 African Voices. Our website address is 1000africanvoices.com. We are calling this series Africa's Future Reimagined, where we demystify what the fourth industrial revolution means for our beautiful continent. You will hear views on cybersecurity, Internet of Things, cloud computing, chatbots, blockchain, etc. What do all these things mean for Africa? For those who enjoyed the first series titled Taking Africa to the World, where we spoke to influential Africans, fear not, this series will still have some of those elements. Your host is Avurengwi. Welcome.
1000 African Voices.
Hello, Africa. Welcome to yet another episode of 1000 African Voices. Africa's Future Reimagined, where we talk to influential Africans in the tech space, but we also talk to those who are in the tech space globally from the different countries. Today we're joined by Mr. Chris Doe, who will shortly introduce himself to our listeners. Hi, Chris.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, welcome, and thank you for making the time. Chris, maybe just for our listeners, can you please introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Chris Doe, and for 20 plus years, I ran a motion design firm in Santa Monica, California, where we make commercials and music videos for some of the biggest brands and bands in the world. In the last 6 or 7 years, I started a second company, which is like where my passion and my energy lies today. It's a company called The Futur. We tried to educate people through open platforms like YouTube and social media to teach them how to make money doing what it is that they love.
All right. So I'm on your website, The Future without the E.
Mm-hmm.
So thefuture.com. Yeah, maybe let's talk a bit more about that. I mean, your profile talks about you being an Emmy Award Winning Designer. So maybe you can just broaden that as well so that at least our listeners have a full understanding.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, I direct commercials and music videos. One of those music videos garnered me an animation award in the Emmys, and that's how I won an Emmy.
Lovely. And how long have you been doing this type of work overall, and how did you end up making the decision to, in your words, allow people to pursue their passions?
Mm-hmm. So I graduated design school. I went to private art and design school and majored in graphic design. I graduated in 1995. Coincidentally, later that year, towards the end of the year, I started my company called Blind. And I've been on this creative pursuit, transforming what I learned in school in graphic design towards motion graphics, where I learned how to direct, to edit, to do animation and visual effects. It wasn't until about 2014 that I ran into a friend of mine from school. And he knew that I was passionate about teaching. And at this point, I already taught for 15 years at the same school that I went to. He needed a partner and space and production capabilities to produce videos for YouTube. And I already had all that. I had the equipment, the space, and the know-how. So we started producing videos together in 2014. And during this time, I learned a lot about how to create content, how to present yourself online, how to speak to a camera where there's nobody looking back at you. And that propelled me to a very different and divergent path, one that I'm currently pursuing today. So slowly but surely, we started making content, building an audience, and finding out that you actually can teach people from far away and break down some of the socioeconomic and areas around access. The private school that I taught at in Pasadena was a very exclusive and unfortunately also a very expensive school to go to. But I knew that there were a lot of hungry creative minds out there that wanted to learn but just didn't have access. And I wanted to try to see what I could do as a company and as an individual to change some of that.
All right, and Chris, how do I become one of your students? So I'm talking to you, I'm in Africa. How can I be part of the future, so to speak?
Okay. All you need is an internet-enabled device to connect with us. We have produced to date over 800 videos on YouTube, and you can find us on YouTube. If you search for The Future is Here, again, The Future is spelled without an E, and the easiest way to remember that, because people always wonder, where did the E go? Well, we dropped it. So we dropped the ego. Okay, that's where it went. So the future is here. Yeah. So you can watch all our videos there. We do the best that we can to tag them, to title them appropriately, and write descriptions with timestamps so that you don't have to comb through 800 videos. You can just search for what you want on our channel. We talk about things like the principles of design. We talk about mindset. We talk about negotiation, sales, marketing. There's a lot, pricing. There's a lot there for the creative entrepreneur.
At what point in your life, I know you said 2014, but you must have had this idea for a long time. At what point did you think, man, it's time for me to really have a go at this?
Well, I've been teaching since the early 2000s and mostly at one school, but I also taught at Otis and lectured here and there scattered. And I have to tell you, I'm an introvert. And speaking to large groups of people scares me, really. So working with an intimate small group, I'm fine. I had to learn a lot about becoming a public persona and teaching. And because of that, I shied away from speaking on these open platforms. I also was concerned about maintaining a professional reputation. At that point in time, there weren't a lot of examples of professional, credible people creating videos for YouTube. And it's logical. It makes sense. You have little to gain. You have a lot to lose. And presumably, if you're a working professional, you just don't have a lot of free time to be making videos. Now, there are exceptions. There's a gentleman. His name is Andrew Kramer. He's a friend of mine now. He has a channel called Video Copilot and a company by the same name. He started teaching animation and compositing tricks, and he did it in such a wonderful way. They were short, they were engaging, humorous, and just really precise in the way that he was able to put together tricks and tips on how to do very difficult shots that you didn't think you could do. And I was inspired by that, but I didn't think that I had that in me. You know, when you watch somebody on a screen or you listen to them on a podcast, you always think to yourself, that's a special skill that other people possess that excludes my ability, that goes beyond the realm of my skill and ability. It did take a long time for me to start to realize the benefits of that. And like I mentioned, it was my friend Jose Caballero who encouraged and then insisted that I do these videos with him. And he was very generous in saying to me, look, you don't have to do anything. You could stand there like a statue. I'll do all the talking. And when you feel comfortable, start talking. And if people are curious and they go back and view the videos chronologically, you'll see I was sitting there very stiff, jaw clenched, and I barely said anything. Over time, of course, you expose yourself to something and then you get more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, over time, I suppose you learn that with most things, you just need to start and keep going. Mm-hmm. And naturally, you will improve. But it really does help a lot when you have the skills. On your website, I'm really captivated by it. It's clear that you guys at The Future are professionals at this. The YouTube video that you made reference to in general, why is it important that the videos need to be short? And the reason I'm interested in that is we do long form interviews, and I've wrestled with this question for a long time, that how do I keep going for an hour, 2 hours and still make the content engaging because the world seems to be more fond of these short videos?
Yeah, I think it's because there's a mix of audiences who show up for your content. People who know who you are, who are fans of what you do, they want the longer form content. And we do long form streaming too. We did a 2.5 hour live stream yesterday. And I think as we were doing it, our audience grew. So the people who want to learn, who know about you, who understand your values and your style, your communication techniques and all that stuff, they will show up for you and they want the long form content. But if you want to grow your channel, you have to be able to make it easy for somebody who's new to you to discover the content and then to share it with a friend. And we know this, that it's a noisy world. There's a lot of people and things competing for our attention, not to mention our families, our own personal goals, work-life stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's out there, and each and every single one of them is demanding their attention. So what you want to do is make it easy for them, low risk, low investment, to jump into your content. And so I would recommend a mixed strategy of using long form content as your pillar content and then extracting the very best parts and pieces so that that's digestible, that's snackable, that's under 5 minutes. Because if you look at the average view length on YouTube, I think it's under 5 minutes. So if you can hit that, there's a better chance of you growing an audience much quicker.
Chris, I think I need to drop the E as well from my world. Because that's really where I'm stuck.
Yeah.
I want to have a conversation for 3 hours, but I think I need to drop the E and see if we can do something in 5 minutes. I'm struggling to wrap my mind around that, but maybe this is why we have you on 1000 African Voices, so that our listeners can learn a bit from yourself. And again, to go back to the question of how we become part of the Future Your movement. So I'm talking to you, I'm in Nigeria, and I think, I really like what Chris is doing. I want to be part of that. Can you just maybe talk me through how I would go about that?
Yeah, like I mentioned, if you have an internet connection, I understand that that's a privilege that I have here, because there are places that we reach that I didn't think they had adequate plumbing, indoor plumbing, but they still are able to somehow find our channel. And we engage with them on an international level. If you understand what I'm saying and you like my style of communication, I'm a very direct, and sometimes some people would consider rude, but I'm just a very direct communicator. If you enjoy that, and if you want to learn from us, and here's the promise that I'll make to you, is that most of our content is sponsor free. I'm not trying to pitch or sell you a get-rich-quick scheme. I'm just trying to share with you what it is that I've learned. And we put tremendous amounts of energy and effort into producing these videos. And it's a different kind of business model. It's built kind of more on this thank you economy, where if I do something for you and you receive benefit from it, financial gain, professional acclaim, whatever it is that you're looking for in your life, that somehow, somewhere, you'll find a way to return it to us. It could just be simply liking, commenting, or sharing the video somewhere. And it could go to the extreme in which people are sending us money kind of unsolicited. Just the other day, somebody sent me $100 out of the blue. And that's a big amount for somebody just to voluntarily give you money. And it's remarkable also because, especially during this time, this global pandemic where everybody's shut down, futures are uncertain, and people are not quite sure when things are going to return to normal, that's a very generous act. And I take that very seriously, because there's something that we're doing that is resonating with people, that's helping them in whatever social situation they're in, whatever professional situation they're in, to do a little bit better than they did yesterday. And that's the thing that fuels me.
It's an interesting model because most people, especially podcasters, they survive on advertising. But at the same time, when you turn on your favorite podcast and the first 3-4 minutes are just on ads, and in the middle of a deep conversation, you get thrown with another ad, it does become frustrating. But you sort of accept it because for the podcast to survive, you kind of need that. So I find your model to be quite interesting. I would like to learn a bit more. I'm on your YouTube channel. I see you've got quite a few subscribers. The one thing that stands out with your content is just the high quality, and people will, after listening to this, they will go and look for your content and they'll wonder how you get your quality to be as good as it is. It's really some of the best quality I've ever seen. So our
Thank
listeners, please just Google Chris Doe and see if you can find the YouTube channel. How do you get it to be this crystal clear?
There's a couple of things that are going on here. As you recall, I talked about this 20 plus year career in making commercials and music videos for the biggest clients, including Microsoft, Nike, and music videos for bands like Coldplay and Justin Timberlake. So when you are working at such a high level, you have certain expectations of your own work and of your team. And these are high ticket, 6-figure, sometimes in some cases, 7-figure budgets that we're working with. So we have the know-how. We know how to make really high quality stuff. The conflict that we usually run into is to not overproduce our videos, believe it or not, because when you have 2 months to work on something and hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce it, you tend to obsess over every single detail, to overthink what it is that you're doing. But in the education space, we have to find this balance of being topical, relevant, timely, and to be able to teach and communicate. So all the bells and whistles that you can throw at something actually sometimes is a distraction from what it is that you want to communicate. Not always. And so we're trying to find that balance. Like, we have what I would consider pretty expensive and professional gear that we use. I have a team of 12 people who work on site with me and 3 people who work off site. So it's not a basement operation between me and my cousin or something shooting with low fidelity cameras. So there's a lot of production value that we put in, and we have to oftentimes restrain ourselves from adding all the things that we know how to do into this, because we found out it's not the quality of the production that matters, it's the quality of the content. So seek high quality content, not high value production. That's just a bonus for us. And you were mentioning earlier that I have a nice home office studio here with a fancy lighting and camera setup. It's because I've been doing this for years. I have invested in the way that my voice sounds through this microphone and through this camera and lens. And I experiment with it every single day to try to tweak it and get it perfect.
It's totally mesmerizing. Hopefully, once we consult with the future, we will also get a similar output. Hopefully, we'll learn from the lessons that you've had to learn over the many, many years. Chris, I'm wondering, I'm assuming you've been forced to work from home as well. But in your world, I would assume that the impact is not as high as in other worlds. I don't know what your view has been or your experience with the pandemic that we're going through now. How is that impacting your world and your business in general?
Right. I think you're right. We have it pretty good. Like, even in the United States, being that we're in Southern California, there's land, there's space, there's mountains, there's ocean, and we're not literally in a 500 square foot size apartment, which would be very difficult because that could start to feel like a prison cell. And here you can actually go places and see nobody and be okay with that. And I think that's a big difference. Plus, we have wonderful weather here. So the climate right now, I feel like we're in spring, summer, and it's perfect. And so coping with the self-imposed quarantine and lockdown has been fairly easy for us, especially too, because even myself living in Southern California, I am very privileged to live in the house in the neighborhood that I live in. There's plenty of space for myself and my wife and my 2 kids. And I can commute to the office if I need to get something. Some of my guys are electing to stay in the office because we have a huge building and it's very comfortable to be there. And they'd rather be there than to be cooped up in their tiny apartments. So the adjustment here, other than what everybody else has to do, which is to do your best to stay at home, to have best practices when it comes to washing your hands, sanitizing, and wearing face masks, it's been very tolerable.
No, yeah, totally. I can imagine. All right, Chris, as we're about to wrap up again, talking to you whilst at the same time going through your content, it really is amazing. Again, our listeners will want to reach out to you. Where on social media can people find you?
Yes, we are pretty much on every single platform. I would start with our website, which is thefutur.com. Again, drop the ego, and there's no E on the future. You can also find me on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook at the Chris Doe, and Doe is spelled D-O.
And just a question maybe for me, do you find that on the different platforms you have to create content to suit that platform? or can you just about create anything and share it broadly? I've always wondered whether it matters which platform you're on.
Yes, and I have my theory, my position on this is a very good question that you're asking. I feel that if you take the same piece of content and you post it on every single platform, which some people do, you start to train people to say, like, I only need to follow you on one platform. You're not adding anything new to my life. So the platform I use the most often, I will just follow you there and unfollow you elsewhere because I don't want to see the same thing over and over again. This is just my opinion. I believe the best way to grow on different platforms is to understand how to speak and create content natively. This is very important. It's like if you travel to Mexico, you're going to want to learn to speak Spanish. If you travel to Germany, you're going to want to speak German. You want to learn their customs so that you can integrate and feel like a native. So when I'm trying to get an idea out on Twitter, it's going to look very different than it sounds on LinkedIn. Now, sometimes if somebody's looking me up on social media, like, wait a minute, you just copy and paste that. On simple things like announcing, hey, we just dropped a video, there's not a lot that I'm going to do there. But I'll give you an example of how to take one big idea and to translate it across different social platforms in case somebody's interested. I tend to work this way. I have a thought. I'm not quite sure if it's going to work. I put it out on Twitter. And Twitter is that kind of space where people do engage very quickly and you can get feedback really fast. And you can find out if people are interested in this idea, if you phrase it properly, if you're being tone deaf to what's going on. And what's amazing is that people will give you their unbridled, full-throated opinion. And sometimes they help to shape the way that it sounds. They'll add an additional quote or a reference point or something that I didn't know. So now if I have something that has a lot of engagement, I'm going to take that kernel of an idea, I'm going to bring it over to Instagram and create a 10-slide carousel out of that. Now I can say that I've tested this idea. It's got traction. There's some heat to it. And I have this additional research done for me for free by friends and people who hate me. And then I create an Instagram carousel out of that. And then based on the ones that perform really well, and again, there's feedback there too, like, oh, you misspelled this, you dummy, or the original person who said that was this. So you have this opportunity to correct it. So feedback is very important if you learn how to listen to it and if you don't get defensive. So I will quickly then correct the slides, and then I will output that as a PDF and use what I've learned to post that again on LinkedIn. But instead of a 10-slide image thing, I'm now uploading a 10 or more page PDF because there aren't those same limitations on LinkedIn. And then I may write something a little bit differently with the lens of business and business growth. I don't post everything from Instagram to LinkedIn, just the stuff that I feel is relevant to a business-minded audience. Now get this, the carousel that I've created, I use Keynote. If that works really well and it's performing across my different platforms, I'm going to turn that into a video. You guys know this, that there's a rehearse mode inside Keynote where you can actually step through your slides and record your audio. The laziest thing you can do is just hit export so you have visuals to audio that you don't even need closed captioning for because there are already visuals and typography supporting what it is that you're doing. You could take that and then upload that to YouTube. So what you're doing is you're creating native content for the platform it was intended for. And you know what? If you extract that audio file, that becomes something that you can upload to a very short podcast. If you do enough of these keynotes, you can put them together and give a TED Talk, an 18-minute talk somewhere. And again, record that as video. So it's very generative. So what I want people to walk away with, because this might sound like it's too much information to process, what I like to do is test ideas, use the internet for what it's for, which is a creative sounding board to find ideas that work and connect with people. The ones that don't, either rephrase or just let it go. Because if nobody cares about it on Twitter, the data is telling you maybe people are not going to care about it on Instagram. Now, this is no guarantee formula because there are posts that I've made on Instagram where I thought this is going to be great. So I make a video out of this, I post it on YouTube, and it doesn't skyrocket the way it does on Instagram. So it's not a guarantee, but it could save you a ton of wasted time and energy.
I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from this conversation is the art of letting go and to just let the E fall off so that you can produce content that people actually care about. Again, personally, I've struggled with that for a few years because I've said, no, I really want to do long form content. But at the end of the day, I can't be making content for myself, but rather for the audiences, the listeners, etc. Those are our customers. So I've really learned a lot from listening to this. So Chris, thank you for sharing your wisdom, and hopefully we better for it as 1000 African Voices, and our listeners have obviously learned a lot as well. So yeah, thank you for making the time.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
That was our first guest. You'll be hearing from our second guest on the other side of this break. Today, I am pleased to announce that we're joined by Anjali Malik, who will shortly introduce herself. Hi, Anjali.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, welcome to 1000 African Voices. I'm excited to have you on. Maybe before we get started, you can just tell our listeners what it is that you do.
Absolutely. So I am a breast imaging radiologist in Washington, D.C. So I am someone who detects and diagnoses breast cancer through the interpretation of mammograms and through performing biopsies utilizing minimally invasive techniques like using mammograms, ultrasounds, and MRIs. And so I definitely use technology as a part of my everyday, from the images I'm interpreting to the computers that we're using, but also, with breast imaging evolving and with radiology technology always evolving, we're seeing a lot of the introduction of artificial intelligence, which I know is something that's really important to your listeners.
No, absolutely. And I remember a few years ago reading up on the impact that AI is likely to have on jobs. And I think radiology was on top of that list, if I recall. So it will be interesting to get your perspective on how you think the fourth industrial revolution is likely to impact your world, generally speaking.
Absolutely. It's something that's on the forefront of every radiologist's mind.
Mm-hmm. Why is that? Why do you think your field would be highlighted as one of those areas that could be integrated within the 4IR space with ease?
Well, I think one of the reasons that it's come under examination is because, again, as I sort of referenced, we are based in technology. We're performing these images, interpreting them on a computer. And as humans, we are subject to things like human error, distraction, exhaustion, fatigue. And so the idea of AI is to be enhancing or perfecting the human experience when it comes to radiology. Now, another thing with AI is the concept of machine learning. So some might say that what a radiologist does is just sit in a dark room and look at image after image. And while that's true, we're looking for patterns. A lot of radiology is pattern recognition. It's, interpreting a chest x-ray, and 99% of them are going to be normal, but being able to identify that one that is abnormal and quickly. Similarly, for a mammogram, radiologists can sit and read 100 or 200 in one sitting, and a lot of it is pattern recognition, or at least it's going through an approach where, you look at this part of the breast first, then this part of the breast next. And so the thought is those are things that you can teach a computer to do. And the question comes in my mind is, can you ever really teach a computer enough that it could out-interpret a human? And the answer so far is no. In fact, in March, JAMA, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, so it's a big medical journal here in the States and abroad, and they published the DREAM Challenge, which was seeing if any of the current existing computer algorithms could best a specialized breast imaging radiologist. And the answer thus far is no. So I'm sure and I think the study even looked at combining some of the various computer algorithms, and then there were scenarios where you could possibly have somewhat better interpretation. But overall, in the current paradigm, we're not seeing that, but we are examining ways that the technology could possibly enhance our current workflow. So the idea of screening is to be able to test for a disease that when caught early can be treated and cured. So breast cancer falls often into that category. We know there are some breast cancers that we still aren't able to, treat or save those affected. But for the majority of breast cancers, if we detect them early, we can save them. And in order to offer screening, it needs to be cheap, quick, accessible, and easily performed. And so the idea is that AI could help with the quick aspect. It could increase the number of images I'm able to interpret by making my job easier. And the other idea is that with screening mammogram, if 1,000 women get a screening mammogram, approximately 100 to 200, depending on who's interpreting these mammograms, will have to return for additional imaging based on an area of suspected concern. The majority of those women will go on to have normal images, no evidence of cancer. And that's great. But what we want is to reduce that number as low as we can while remaining safe. When it comes to things like screening, we do still have statistics that come into play. So there's sensitivity, there's specificity, and at some point, if you're too sensitive, you're not specific enough, and vice versa. And so what we want is to be able to lower the number of women who are affected by these false positives, because of course, it is a great deal of anxiety for those women. But as well, it is a cost to the system, monetarily, and to be able to offer these screening programs to the most women possible, we want to be lowering those costs as well. So if artificial intelligence could help me or other radiologists reduce those false positives, then I can see, in addition to the speed, where it could really have a place in our future.
But we're going to come back to the work that you're doing now, but maybe just to ensure that our listeners have better context, if I can maybe just ask you to take us through your educational backgrounds. I mean, you've got a medical degree, but I'll leave that to you maybe to just take us through how you ended up in this space, how you moved from being Anjali Malik to Dr. Anjali Malik, just to take us through how you ended up where you are now.
Sure, absolutely. So, of course, the system varies from country to country. But for us here in the States, we go through, the normal high school, so the K through 12. And then I went to college at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and I majored in public health. So public health had always been of interest to me. In fact, I always had dreamt of, maybe doing Doctors Without Borders or something along those lines, and, fighting disease epidemics and pandemics, obviously something like what we're seeing now, maybe working for the CDC, World Health Organization. So in my mind, I had dreams like that. And so I studied public health while also taking the necessary pre-medical courses. Then I went to Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I got my medical degree. I did consider as well getting a master's in public health. Tulane is known for its tropical medicine program. And so it would be, again, going down that infectious disease route, which would have played well into just public health overall and some of the initial interests I had had. And then Hurricane Katrina hit. And, I don't know if your listeners are as familiar, but it was a huge natural disaster that happened in 2005. And it really affected the city of New Orleans. And for my own education, luckily it wasn't heavily impacted in that I didn't have to, lose a year. But it did impact our education in how we went on to be educated and the areas that we were training and sort of the patients that we were seeing. And so after we were able to return to New Orleans, the patients I was seeing were in a very poor state of health. They had obviously been neglected. They had been neglected and they had neglected themselves as well, just because their focus had shifted into, survival mode after the hurricane. And so when I was on my surgery rotation, I actually saw a lot of breast cancer patients. And that's when I sort of entered that world and shifted my focus from, what I thought, interest in infectious disease, global health, into women's health. And I realized that I liked working with that patient population. I also realized at that point that I liked working with my hands. I liked doing procedures, which is not something that I had anticipated. And so, so then I sort of shifted into radiology and with a focus on breast imaging. And then I did my training at the University of Texas Southwestern in Dallas. So many people know that the hospital at which I trained, which is Parkland Hospital, because that's where President John F. Kennedy was taken when he was shot in Dallas. So it's sort of well known for that. And it's a really big county hospital. So in addition to the fact that you're seeing all of Dallas County, it also tends to see a lot of patients from south of the border who have crossed and are in need of medical care. So a wonderful place to train in terms of volume and pathology and overall experience. And then so that residency is 5 years. You train in all of diagnostic radiology with some rotations in breast imaging, which is my specialty. But then I did a 1-year fellowship in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University, where then I specialized in breast imaging. And so my whole year was just doing imaging specific to breast cancer detection and diagnosis.
I'm sure even though you now moved into radiology, I'm sure you're keeping a really keen eye on the current COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, as a medical professional, I mean, what has been your sense of that? I mean, even from Africa, we are following what's happening in the States. We followed what happened in China, but the pandemic has really been, for lack of a better word, a disaster, so to speak, from an outsider's perspective, in as far as the US of A goes. What's been your perspective as a medical professional?
Yeah, I mean, I think disaster is not far off just because of the number of people that have been affected, right? So, we think of natural disasters, we think of hurricanes or earthquakes or tornadoes, but certainly this has been the medicine equivalent of that in terms of the number of people affected, not just infected and deaths, but obviously people whose lives have been impacted by this. So, we always knew in the back of our minds that an airborne communicable disease was a possibility. And unfortunately, we have been hit by this and have sort of been caught a little bit with our pants down in the sense that, we worldwide didn't necessarily have the measures in place to effectively test, quarantine, decisions that if they had been made on the front end, possibly could have been implemented sooner. The public could have been better educated on it in the beginning so that there wasn't so much confusion that we've obviously seen worldwide. And even now, I mean, it's May 4th, and we're seeing a lot of states here in the U.S. that have started relaxing the restrictions that have been so important in helping to decrease the disease burden. But the risk for the pandemic has not decreased. It's really important for people to still be taking these measures, whether it's staying at home if you don't need to be out, wearing a mask to prevent you spreading disease to others, really diligent hand washing and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think number one for me as a breast imaging specialist, I always talk about awareness, and most often I'm talking about in relation to breast cancer. But I think that in this pandemic, awareness has really been important as well. And if people had just been better informed, awareness can then lead to action. And we saw that taking place where people were able to shelter at home and quarantine. And I just think that it's the confusion and the lack of information that is causing people to not abide by these orders as well as closely, or for some of these governors to feel pressured to reopen their states to help stimulate the economy. Obviously, the way that it's impacting the worldwide economy is of concern. You hear some things about how the cure is worse than the disease. And I think that's a nice catchphrase and that's a nice, soundbite, but I don't necessarily think that that's the case. Maybe if we were to, be thoughtful about how we reopen economies or about how we choose to stimulate the economy while also being safe, we can move things forward. But it has to be a really carefully planned stepwise approach. And I don't know that that's really what's been taking place with some of these reopenings.
Yeah, I think for me, the observation I've made is we always talk about the importance of good leadership, and very few instances test the quality of leadership. And unfortunately, if your leadership is not what it needs to be when you're faced with a crisis. I mean, you referred earlier to Hurricane Katrina. There was a big debate there on the quality of leadership. And what we're seeing now globally is how are different countries managing the COVID-19 issue. And I mean, coming to your country, when you see federal leadership of federal government going against maybe what's happening within the different states, it's quite interesting that as a governor, you may have a view and want to maybe continue with the lockdowns. But if your national government is saying, no, we actually need to stimulate the economy, it then becomes a really difficult thing to balancing health versus the economy. So yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. For me, this really has been a test of leadership globally, whether it's the World Health Organization or political leadership, etc. It's been interesting to watch, and unfortunately, we have lost many, many lives in the process.
Absolutely. And I think it's easy for me to say, but I think we need to really understand the value of health as it contributes to our economy, right? So, I mean, health is an investment. Health is a commodity. Health is something that, and we're seeing that now. We forget the value that it has and holds. But I think that, we can't just think of the economy in terms of value. Dollar value. Really need to be examining it as more closely as the quality of life, the health of the citizens in general. And so I think this has exposed a lot of that.
All right, maybe let's go back a bit to what you do on a day-to-day basis. Currently on your website, anjalimalikmd.com. By the way, really good pictures. You need to put me in contact with your photographer. It's really good.
Thank you.
But it's clear that not only do you care about the work that you do, but you seem to have a passion for sharing what you do, whether it's on social media or elsewhere. I mean, you could just do your work and go home, but you seem to want to do a bit more. Well, what is behind that? What's driving you to go outside your 8 to 5, so to speak, and say, I actually want to reach out to people in the world so that maybe I spread this message on breast cancer?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And you're right. It is, it would be easy to just sort of leave everything at the door and go home, but that's not why I went into medicine. I talked about my interest in public health from the beginning. And so I see platforms like Instagram and Twitter or my website or, doing podcasts like this as an opportunity to spread awareness and then helping to translate that awareness into action. So, sitting back and reading screening mammograms, it's important work and absolutely is the backbone of what I do as a breast imaging radiologist. But I need to make sure women are getting in the door for those. I need to make sure they understand why they're coming for those so that they're able to be, more compliant with these recommendations. And another thing that's really important to me, and it's part of my work with an organization called Bright Pink, is educating young women on their risk for both breast and ovarian cancer and helping them understand ways to reduce risk, to identify risk, to know their family history, to determine if they need genetic testing. Because in addition to early detection on imaging, we need to early identify these women who are at high risk so that we can really be capturing them and placing them into the necessary, whether it's high risk screening protocols, the need to get surgeries for preventative actions, et cetera. And so all of this outreach that I do, predominantly online, but also some in person, is about public health. I want women to be aware and empowered and educated and to take action.
I think the world really needs more people like yourself. I mean, earlier you talked about the value of information in fighting COVID-19, for instance. And again, going back to the World Health Organization, I think they've really been challenged in having a coherent message from the beginning. Yes, it's true, COVID-19 was new for all of us, but I saw how a message from the very top, in this case, the WHO, led countries down a path, and every time there was change, then that those countries needed to then readjust. As we're about to wrap up, Anjali, how do people form part of your movement? How can people either support you or get in touch with you so that they can get the assistance that they may need?
Yeah, so the organization I referenced earlier, Bright Pink, you can find them online. They're also active on social media on Instagram, Be Bright Pink. I think that's also their Twitter handle. And same for me. So you referenced my website, AnjaliMalikMD.com. And you can also find me on Instagram and Twitter at Anjali Malik MD. And I talk about breast health, women's health, screening, as well as other initiatives that are important to me, like plant-based eating, eco-friendly living, etc.
Oh, yeah, I saw that on your Twitter handle. So maybe before you go, we can talk a bit about that. The hashtag plant-based. Yeah, what is the story with that?
So, there are a lot of different reasons that people choose to eat a plant-based diet. So in case it isn't self-evident, plant-based, of course, meaning no animal products, no meat, no dairy. So I made that choice for a few different reasons. Number one, I can't have dairy. So it took a few years of experimentation for me to realize that for me, dairy is very inflammatory, which is the case for a lot of people. We think we're having seasonal allergies. We're actually having inflammation due to dairy. We think we have, acneic skin or skin problems, and it's actually related to dairy. And then when it comes to meat, I have an Indian Hindu background, so a lot of people are vegetarian. I'm actually from the area of India, Punjab, that happens to eat a lot of meat. But I, from a very young age, sort of had that idea of animal rights, animal welfare, and not eating as much meat, but I did still continue to, just with a careful eye on that. But I think at some point my focus shifted, and I felt like it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And the health implications of meat and dairy are well known. And so I made the choice, both for an ethical, health, and just sort of personal reasons. But there's a huge community that I found online of plant-based physicians, nutritionists, fitness experts, et cetera, who you could find online. And it's really been a wonderful community of support and information.
Yeah, I know the people who think that being online all the time drives us apart as the human race. But I find that online platforms do actually bring people together at times. So the community that you've made reference to now, I'm pretty sure it would have been difficult without the power of the World Wide Web. And depending on what you want to use this tool that we call the internet for, you can either use it to bring communities together or to polarize them, as we continue to see within political circles. But from all of us, Dr. Anjali Malik, I've really enjoyed listening to your views, whether it's on COVID or breast cancer or just on global matters when it comes to public health. It's really been a pleasure to have you on our podcast. Thank you for making the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day and stay safe.
You too. Take care. Cheers.
1000 African Voices.
You've been listening to 1000 African Voices. Please join us next time as we bring you another African voice. 1000 African Voices is produced by me, Aburengwi, with Sam Garnich on sound production. Our head researcher is Jones Maleka. For more information, including the contact details of our guests, visit us on our website, 1000africanvoices.com. You can also subscribe to our show on iTunes by searching for 1000 African Voices. Please help us grow the project by logging on to 1000africanvoices.com to subscribe. If you wish to form part of the show, send an email to jonesforchange@gmail.com. Until next time, Kungana Africa, and take care.